Cringe is a strange emotion. Everyone knows exactly what it feels like. Yet if I asked you to define it, you might struggle. It's one of those emotions that's somehow obvious and mysterious at the same time. And the more I thought about it, the stranger it became. Why do different people cringe at different things? Why can one person watch someone dancing in public and think, good for them, while another can barely look at them? Why do some embarrassing memories disappear after a few days, while others stay with us for years? At first, I thought this video was going to be about cringe, but somewhere along the way I realized it wasn't. It was about the invisible boundaries we build around ourselves because of it. So let's try to define it, not with a dictionary, but with how it actually functions. I think cringe is what happens when we witness someone crossing a boundary that feels socially unacceptable. Sometimes that boundary is shared by almost everyone. That's why entire compilations of cringe videos exist online. Most of us watch them and instinctively react the same way. But that's only part of the story. Because other times, the exact same behavior can produce completely different reactions. One person watches K-pop idol acting cute and thinks it's adorable. Another finds it unbearably cringy. A third person doesn't feel much of anything. The behavior didn't change. The observer did. Which means cringe isn't entirely objective. That's what I was trying to get at. But it's also not entirely subjective either. It's born somewhere in between. Partly from the social norms we all share, and partly from the personal boundaries we've built throughout our own lives. And I think that's where things start getting interesting, because those personal boundaries didn't appear out of nowhere. So where do those personal boundaries come from? Sometimes the answer is obvious. Someone laughs at us, someone calls us weird, someone tells us to stop. But I don't think that's how most of our boundaries are built. Most of them are much quieter than that. Maybe you tell a joke and nobody laughs. Maybe you say something that makes the conversation suddenly awkward. Maybe you notice a strange look on someone's face. Or maybe there isn't any judgment at all, just silence. Your brain quietly fills in the blanks. That was embarrassing. Don't do that again. And just like that, a new boundary is born. What's fascinating is that two people can live through the exact same moment and build completely different boundaries. One person thinks, well, that didn't work, and they move on, while the other quietly decides, I'm never doing that again. The event was the same, the judgment wasn't, which means people don't just experience social feedback differently. They build different boundaries from the very same experience. And over time, those boundaries become something much bigger. They become the invisible fences surrounding our personality. Think of your personality as a piece of land surrounded by fences. Some of those fences are there for a good reason. They can stop you from hurting other people. They stop you from crossing moral and legal boundaries. Those fences are worth keeping. But I don't think all of our fences belong in that category. Some of them were built by a frightened version of ourselves. A version that was embarrassed, rejected, or simply misunderstood. Those are the fences I'm interested in. Maybe one day you got excited and people laughed. So you built a fence around your enthusiasm. Maybe you tried to be funny and the joke didn't land. So you built a fence around your sense of humor. Or maybe you asked a question and felt stupid afterwards. So you built a fence around your curiosity. Each fence makes perfect sense on its own. It was your mind trying to protect you from experiencing that same pain again. But protection comes at a price. Because every fence doesn't just keep pain out, it also keeps possibilities out. The possibility of dancing, of creating, of asking questions, of being spontaneous, of saying what you actually think, of trying something you're not good at. Over time, those fences stop protecting your personality and start becoming it. And the more fences you build, the smaller your world becomes. But here's where the fence metaphor gets even more interesting. If you've built these fences around yourself, then someone else's behavior can sometimes make you aware of a fence you didn't even realize was there. You watch someone dancing without caring how they look, or being completely sincere, or saying something that you'd be terrified to say, and something inside you goes, "That's so cringe." But why? Maybe because they're doing something you taught yourself not to do. They're standing outside a boundary that you've placed around yourself, and suddenly their freedom feels uncomfortable to you. Not necessarily because they're doing something wrong, but because they're doing something you don't allow yourself to do. Cringe doesn't only tell us something about the person we're looking at, it also tells us something about ourselves, about the boundaries we've built, the experiences we've had, the things we've silently decided were unacceptable. In other words, when you cringe, you're not just watching another person, you're also watching a glimpse of your own invisible fences. If these invisible fences really exist, then we should be able to find situations where they temporarily disappear. And I think we can. Think about alcohol. One of the first things people notice when they get drunk is that they start doing things they never normally do. Suddenly they can dance, they sing, they tell people they love them, they laugh louder, they become more spontaneous. And it's almost as if some of those invisible fences begin to weaken. There's an old Latin saying, "In vino veritas." In wine there is truth. I don't think alcohol literally reveals your true self. It's more complicated than that. But I do think it reveals something interesting. It reveals parts of you that normally stay locked behind those fences. And then something strange happens. The next morning, someone shows you a video from the night before. Suddenly you cringe. Not because the video changed, but because the fences are back up again. So what do we do with all of this? Cringe is a strange emotion because it rarely feels finished. When one of those memories comes back, we don't just remember it, we relive it. And if you've ever sat with a feeling for more than a few seconds, you've probably noticed something. Your mind starts looking for an answer, for closure, for some explanation that finally makes the feeling go away. I think that's because cringe isn't really asking to be forgotten. It's asking to be understood. And that's where most of us make a mistake. We judge ourselves, but we never explain ourselves. But maybe you've been lucky enough to experience something different. Maybe there's a moment you still remember where you were convinced you made a complete fool of yourself, and then you talked to someone about it, and they said something you hadn't considered. You were just trying to be funny. You were just a kid. You were trying something new. It's really not that serious. And suddenly the memory felt different. Nothing about what happened had changed. You just understood it differently. And that horrible feeling finally had somewhere to go. You got closure. I've actually experienced this myself. I once did something really weird without thinking much about it. Later, I cringed so badly about it that sometimes I couldn't even sleep. Eventually, I talked to someone about what happened and explained what I was actually trying to do, and they gave me a completely different perspective. They basically said, "You weren't trying to do anything wrong. You were just being innocent and acting in the moment. You didn't really understand the situation." And somehow that was enough. Nothing about the memory changed, but the way I understood it did. And that conversation gave me the closure I couldn't give myself. Maybe that's what we need sometimes. Not to forget what happened, but to understand it differently. And if you don't have anybody to give you that closure, why not become that person for yourself? Instead of asking, "Why am I so embarrassing?" ask, "What was I actually trying to do?" Maybe you were trying to be funny. Maybe you were trying to be clever. Maybe you were trying to fit in. Or maybe you were simply experimenting. Whatever the explanation is, there's probably something human underneath it. And if you were talking to a child who had just experienced the same thing, you probably wouldn't tell them they were pathetic or weird. You'd probably tell them something like, "Oh, you were just learning. You were just trying. You were just being a kid. Don't worry about it." So why not offer yourself the same understanding? Maybe the person you've been waiting to give you closure is you. And maybe that's why cringe exists in the first place. Not just to embarrass us, but to teach us. Society doesn't only teach us through explicit rules. Nobody has to tell you, "Don't do that." Sometimes all it takes is a strange look, an awkward silence, a laugh. And without anyone saying a word, you quietly change your behavior. Eventually, we become our own police officers. We start watching ourselves before anyone else has to. And that's kinda useful, because without it, society as we know it probably couldn't function. But every useful tool has a point where it becomes harmful. Fear keeps us alive. Too much fear keeps us trapped. Cringe works the same way. At first, it protects us. Then, if you're not careful, it starts limiting us. And I sometimes wonder whether the internet has quietly made that problem worse. Today, it feels like there's always an audience. Everything can be recorded, everything can be shared, everything can be judged. So maybe we've become less afraid of making mistakes and more afraid of looking foolish. And those aren't the same thing. So the next time you cringe, ask yourself, who benefits from this feeling? Is it protecting you, or is it keeping you small? Thank you for watching.